Shalom. First and foremost, I want to give all praises, honor, and glory to Yahweh, Bahasham, Yahushai, Bahasham, Recha Kodash. Double honors to the elders and the apostles of Great Millstone, and peace and blessings to the elect. And today we're going to go into the book of Hosea, the 4th chapter. And in here we see Hosea addressing some more of the iniquity, all right, going on here amongst the amongst Israel, right, the kingdom of Israel here in particular, and addressing, some of the vile deeds that the priests, or at least those that were labeled priests, proclaiming to be priests, were doing, okay, and why that judgment is going to come upon them for that. So this is the book of Hosea chapter 4, verse 1. Hear the word of the Lord Yahweh, ye children of Israel, for the Lord hath a controversy with the inhabitants of the land. All right, so basically the Lord has a problem with you that are living in this land. Why? Because there is no truth, nor mercy, nor knowledge of God in the land. So pretty much all throughout, the behavior that was being, that was Israelites were embodying, so to speak, was that of a lack of knowledge of the Most High. They weren't following his laws, his statutes, his commandments. They were doing whatever they wanted to do, similar to what you see today. No mercy, okay, killing, lying, defrauding, without fear of the Lord. So the Lord had a problem with that. Verse 2, by swearing and lying and killing and stealing and committing adultery, they break out, and blood toucheth blood. All right, and like I said, that's like something you see today, right? They make music about it. They go around, they as they claim, they live it. All right, but what is it really that they're living? Theft, stealing, committing adultery. When you look at a lot of the controversy, right, whether it's on social media or whatever the case is, a lot of those like stories or controversies that come out with Jake is like adultery, like this woman, low key did this. It's so much to where they even make skits and jokes about it. Like it's a common thing, right? They openly make music about taking one another's lives. All right. And similar to what was happening back then, there's just lawlessness. And you look at them and you know they don't have an ounce of the fear of the Lord in their minds. And that's why they live that way. So it was the same thing going on back then, which was being addressed here. And so you see why now this, the time of Jacob's trouble that we're prophesying about here, it's almost parallel to what the prophets of old were prophesying about, be it the Assyrian captivity or the Babylonian captivity. It was the prophets being sent on the scene to warn Israel, hey, you're doing this, you're going off, you need to stop, you need to repent, because there is this impending danger that the Lord is bringing. All right, and you're not going to escape it. And that's what we've been doing now. So it's the same thing. Okay, and just like they did not take heed or listen back then, majority of them are not going to listen this time. Verse 3, therefore shall the land mourn, and every one that dwelleth therein shall languish, with the beasts of the field, and with the fowls of heaven, yea, the fishes of the sea also shall be taken away. And this would be by way of the judgments that the Lord will begin to bring upon the land, right? For example, famine, droughts, right, plagues. And by this, the people would be going through hard times, right? Even the animals would be dying, right, along with the birds from lack of pasture, okay? The fish for lack of water. So pretty much as the Lord is saying here, as a result of your wickedness and your iniquity, I'm going to start to bring these plagues upon the land to punish you. Verse 4, yet let no man strive nor reprove another. Right, so don't start pointing fingers now and trying to play the blame game. Right, for thy people are as they that strive with the priest, meaning they've gotten to the point of challenging, right? Because the when you go into the law, which I have it here, the job of the priest was to obviously minister unto the Lord, but also to lead the people in the right way in terms of how to serve the Lord. And so by contending or striving with the priest, they would in essence be neglecting the law, right? To challenge, right, the ways that the Lord has set for Israel to live by. Okay, so that's pretty much how far gone they were. This is Deuteronomy chapter 17, verse 12, right? That reference that I made there. It says, "And the man that will do presumptuously and will not hear or hearken unto the priest that standeth to minister there before the Lord Yahweh thy God, or unto the judge, even that man shall die. And thou shalt put away the evil from Israel." But fast forward to today, or at least to the time of Hosea, this was common work. And even with that, the majority of the priests there weren't even, priests sanctified by the Lord. Because remember, going back to the time of Jeroboam, not Jeroboam the second, but Jeroboam, the original one who built the golden calves, he ended up basically driving out the majority, if not all, of the Levitical priests from the northern kingdom. And then he raised up, right, base men to be priests. So you had a lot of those individuals playing that role. But you can also imagine, in a practical sense, it wouldn't be every single Levite or every single priest that would stand so stiffly for the Lord that they'd have to be kicked out of the northern kingdom. You definitely had some that would defect, right? That would say, oh well, they can do whatever it is that they can be a priest basically for Jeroboam. They can be a priest in terms of idol worship and all of those things. Okay, and that's what some of them did. So, verse 5, as it says, "Therefore shalt thou fall in the day, and the prophet also shall fall with thee in the night, and I will destroy thy mother." Right? So it's just to say, you're basically going to get judged, right? Along with your false prophets, okay, and that mother being Israel, right? That she that bare thee, and that's that metaphorical Israel, okay? Verse 6, "My people are destroyed for lack of knowledge. Because thou hast rejected knowledge, I will also reject thee." Now, at this point, yes, Hosea is generally addressing the people, but he starts to focus also on the priests. Why? Because they are the ones who are supposed to know the way of the Lord and teach that to the people. Okay, so as you'll see here, by the people being destroyed for lack of knowledge, and it wasn't due to, not having the ability for it, but by rejecting it. Okay, by first and foremost, the priest rejecting the knowledge of the Lord, and then misleading the people, as we read down, you'll see how. As the Lord says here, "I will also reject thee, that thou shalt be no priest to me, seeing thou hast forgotten the law of thy God." And that word "forgotten" goes into like a lack of care. So not just like, memory loss, but really like a negligence of it. So the Lord said, since you are neglecting, okay, my laws, I will also forget thy children. So I'm also going to neglect you and your children. I'm not going to bless you. I'm not going to, don't come to me, praying for this, that, and the third. Verse 7, "As they were increased, so they sinned against me. Therefore will I change their glory into shame." So as you started to live good and get better and increase, right, they started to become careless, right? They started to become self-willed and turned against the Lord. And he says, okay, so that blessing, those blessings, that glory, that joy you had, I'm going to turn that into shame. Verse 8, "They eat up the sin of my people, and they set their heart on their iniquity." And when you go into that word sin, right, there's a couple of use cases here. One of them being, as you can see, this portion here in the interlinear like view that you're seeing here shows you how this Hebrew word here is translated throughout the Bible, right? So 182 times it's translated as the word sin. 116 times is translated as the word sin offering. So it's based on the context, right? And that's why you see here the outline of biblical usage, right? Which is to say, like, how is this word used throughout the Bible? So there are times when it's used as to represent sin or sinful, and sometimes it's used to represent sin offering, right? Or as it says, punishment for sin. So you may read the scriptures and you may see the word like sin offering, and in the Hebrew, it'll be the same word here because this is the context that is being used in. So in this case, right, it makes sense to be sin offering here because now we're dealing with the priest. And going back to the verse, it says they eat up the sin of my people, or the sin offering, because going back to the law, right, that there's a portion of that sacrifice that would be given to the priest. That would be their portion to have. So these people were taking advantage of that, eating that up. And as it says, and they set their heart on their iniquity. So they were glad for Israel to sin because that would be more portions for them. Okay, so they set their mind, they look forward to the iniquity of the people, because then they would come and bring a sin offering, and then they would benefit off of that. So just straight wickedness. And there shall be like people, like priests. So, just as the people are corrupt, so are the priests, and therefore whatever judgment comes upon the people, it'll also come upon the priests. They're not exempt. And I will punish them for their ways and reward them their doings. For they shall eat and not have enough. They shall commit whoredom and shall not increase. Okay, and that eating and not having enough, right, is that lack, right? That lack of being satisfied, be it in just things you need, and even in terms of food scarcity, in terms of literal food. Okay, and that whoredom, meaning they're going to commit whoredoms, be it spiritual fornication or even physical adultery and whoredom, because they were doing that as well, and they wouldn't benefit from it. Why? Because they have left off to take heed to the Lord. So they forsook the Lord. They thought they were better off doing what they wanted to do, serving idols, following their own minds. So the Lord said, okay, now you go out there and see how you can fend for yourself. Wherefore whoredom and wine and new wine take away the heart, which is to say that lifestyle, right, of whoredom, once again, being, physical and spiritual, because they were doing both. So by spiritual, that would be them going after other gods and worshiping other gods and following the rites and the rituals of the heathen. And physically, it would be, actually doing that, right? So that, right, and that wine and that new wine, basically this is representing the kind of lifestyle they were living. Okay, and also you have wine in the metaphorical sense to represent, doctrines or philosophies that they were being introduced to, taketh away the heart, meaning it corrupts their minds. Verse 12, my people ask counsel at their stocks, and their staff declareth unto them. A stock is a piece of wood, so is a staff. So that wood is representing their idols, right? They usually would take the wood and they would make idols out of that. So they go, and the Lord is saying here now to the people, in their perspective, this is a god, but in actuality, it's really just wood. So that's what the Lord is saying here. You go to the stocks, right, to ask counsel, and your staff declares unto you, right? That the priest will tell you, oh, the God of this says this, that, and the third, but it's really just wood that doesn't speak, that doesn't do anything really. For the spirit of whoredoms hath caused them to err. So they were in error. They were erring by the spirit of whoredoms, right? By the spirit of idolatry. And they have gone whoring from under their God. So rather than serve the Heavenly Father, as the covenant that we agreed to says, they went to try and serve other gods, which are no gods. And you see that today. Back then, when you read this, you think, how can they do that? Like, how can they consciously do that, knowing that, all the history of what the Lord did? It's the same thing today. How many people do you know are Christians, so-called Christians, or Muslims, or believe some other religion. And they do it wholeheartedly. Like they go hard for it. Why? Because they're, as it says, that spirit of whoredoms has caused them to err. So this is what it looks like. That the words you're reading, look around you, this is what it looks like. Verse 13, they sacrifice upon the tops of the mountains and burn incense upon the hills under oaks and poplars and elms, because the shadow thereof is good. Now, a lot of other translations have the word elm as is it tabernacle? Let me look at that, which is a bigger tree. Yeah, tabernacle trees, and that is to say, like that's the groves, right? Like the shadow of the tree, like under the tree, or the under the union of trees, right? They would serve and worship idols over there. Okay, as it says, therefore your daughters shall commit whoredom, and your spouses shall commit adultery. I will not punish your daughters when they commit whoredom, nor your spouses when they commit adultery. Now, this is bad enough for the people, but for the priests especially, you were, it was a more strict, right, for the priests in terms of who they could marry, like what status or condition of a woman they could marry, and how their daughters were supposed to behave as well. But the Lord says here, they're going to commit whoredoms and adultery, and I'm not going to punish them. Why should I punish them? Right? For themselves are separated with whores, meaning for you yourselves, the men, the males, are separated with whores. So you talk about your wives and daughters are not being faithful, and yet here you are on a spiritual and physical level doing things that you ought not. And they sacrifice with harlots. And when you go into the word harlots over here, once we get the definition, it'll make more sense as to why it says they sacrifice with harlots. They're not, killing women on the altar. But as you can see, female temple prostitute. All right. So they were, let me pull it up here. What is a temple prostitute? Oh, let me see. What is temple? There we go. Temple prostitution, also known as sacred or cult prostitution, refers to sexual acts performed within the context of religious rites or ceremonies. It involves paid or unpaid sexual intercourse, often with temple priests or servants of a deity as part of a religious practice. While the practice is documented in various ancient civilizations, including ancient Greece, Mesoamerica, and South America, its prevalence and specific forms are debated by scholars. So these are things they were doing, okay? Having sex with temple harlots as rituals and rites. That is that sacrifice with harlots, okay, or temple prostitutes. Therefore, the people that doth not understand shall fall, right? So as a result of this and them rejecting the knowledge, they're gonna fall. They're gonna be cast away. Now, when like back then you had and the thing, as we read on down, it'll give an example there. Let me actually read verse 15 and then make that point. So it says here, though thou Israel play the harlot, yet let not Judah offend. Remember, the kingdom is divided at this point, right? So the message is saying here, Israel is going off, right? They're playing the harlot, they're doing all manner of wickedness, but Judah basically don't follow in their ways. And come not ye unto Gilgal, neither go ye up to Bethaven, because these were places, right, where Israel, the northern kingdom, would be going to like sacrifice and serve and engage in their like wickedness. Yes, it was all throughout the land, but you had certain high points or designated areas where they would go and sacrifice and do all these things. So as it says, basically Judah, don't follow in these ways. Don't go up to Gilgal to partake in their sacrifices. Don't go up to Bethaven, nor swear the Lord liveth, right? Because that is what they would do. They would still feign themselves as though they were priests of the Lord, and yet they would be practicing rites and rituals of the heathens and serving idols. And that leads me to the point, which is, there are times when Israel would go off and they would worship other idols, and you have wicked Israelites as priests doing those things, but they would often also try to merge it, right? To say like we're priests of the Lord, right, and we're serving the Lord, but they're mixing in the customs of heathens into that. So one example is like today, you have a lot of modern day so-called Christians that claim to be believers of the Lord and claim to serve the Lord and do his work, and yet they celebrate these pagan holidays, right? And they bake that in there, that whole Easter Sunday, right? And the whole Christmas and all of those things. Those are not Israelite customs. Those are paganistic rites and rituals. But in their minds, this is Christianity. This is a part of how you serve the Lord. All right. So similarly, back then they were doing that, right? To where they would be, engaging with these temple harlots, right? And sacrificing on these other deities, and yet taking sin offerings and also performing so-called, atonement on behalf of the people, as though they were truly serving the Lord. Verse 16, for Israel slideth back as a backsliding heifer. We know a heifer, right, is a cow, or maybe a young cow, right, to be particular. Now, backsliding is where you would have maybe the cow or the lamb or whatever it is, and you're trying to take it in one direction, because when you go into backsliding, it goes into like rebellion. So you're trying to get it to go in one direction, and then it won't go, or it'll start pulling, or sometimes it'll plant its feet down, and then it'll start to push itself back as you're trying to pull it forward. It'll literally try to push itself backwards in rebelling, right? Because it doesn't want to go, or it'll start jumping around and just being difficult for you to get it to go where you want it to go. And that's what the Lord is likening the kingdom of Israel onto here, the northern kingdom, as a backsliding heifer. You're rebelling, right? You don't want to go under the order or the rule of the Lord. It says, now the Lord will feed them as a lamb in a large place, right? And when you read this, it makes more sense in some of the other translations, as it's worded, as a backsliding heifer, should the Lord feed you as a lamb in a large, pasture? Which is rhetorical, right? Which is no. Verse 17, Ephraim is joined to idols, let him alone, right? And Ephraim being the head tribe of the northern kingdom, as it says, they're joined onto idols, just like the rest of the northern kingdom. So when it says there, let them alone, meaning like they won't even hear it. You can't even get to them. They're just like, they're heavy into that. And you can see that all the way up until today. Verse 18, their drink is sour. When you go into that sour, it really translates to, so let's take a look at that. As it says here, to depart, to put away, right? To remove. So in other words, their drink is taken away. Their drink is gone. They have committed whoredom continually. Okay, that's that straight idolatry. Her rulers with shame do love give ye. Now, in the Hebrew, the do love give ye are both the same word, which is ahab, meaning love. And shame, right, is shame. So what it's saying here is they love shame. Okay, and it says that Hosea is saying that in the sense that by their actions, they show forth that they really do love shame, because they so gracefully and, with so much energy, they engage in these shameful acts and activities and deeds. Verse 19, the wind hath bound her in her wings, and they shall be ashamed because of their sacrifices. And that wind being bounding her in her wings is to represent a swiftness of how they would be taken out of their land, or really carried off into captivity, which was the impending judgment that was to come upon the northern kingdom here. As it says, and they shall be ashamed because of their sacrifices, because of the judgment or the consequence that would now come upon them as a result of their wicked, adulterous, and idolatrous ways. So with that, that brings us to the end of the book of Hosea, the 4th chapter. Lord willing, this was edifying to the elect. In closing, I want to give all praises, honor, and glory to Yahweh, Bahasham, Yahweh Shai, Bahasham, Rachak Wadash. Until next time, Shalom.